Good day. My name is Frank Katita from Chime Digital Health Insights. I'd like to welcome you today to our webinar. Very fascinating, by the way, in the cybersecurity space. It's titled Efficient and Effective New Exposure Management Strategies for Healthcare. I'm honored to have Ty from Clarity and Ahi from Christiana, the practitioner on the CSIO side. CISO side, and we'll be having them introduce themselves. And I'll be getting off the screen for a while as Ty does an introductory presentation. So if we could start out, Ty, could you introduce yourself, and then we'll pass it on to Ani.
Sure, that sounds great. Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for taking your time to tune into this topic. I think we've got a lot of really great points to make and some ideas and perspectives that maybe you haven't considered before, and ways to kind of streamline the operations within your own organization. And to help me do that here today, I've got Anahi. And she, for probably most of you, I think a lot of you might already have listened to her speak before. She's a rock star on the circuit here. I think that when we think about information sharing here in healthcare is the only way to beat the bad guys. She really puts in the overtime to help people. So with that, Anahi, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and Christiana Care?
Sure. I'm the CISO at Christiana Care. Christiana Care is the largest health system in Delaware, with hospitals and facilities in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. Highly innovative organization that really believes that in order to really deliver high quality care and transformative care, technology is needed and digital means. And so with that, they also understand that cybersecurity is integral to the success of our mission and vision. And so, it's great to be here and happy to share.
Well, super. Yeah, because there's really nothing going on in cybersecurity and healthcare right now at all, right?
Very boring.
Yeah, so we'll probably run out of time before we run out of topics, I think, on this one. And so just for all of you, kind of as a side, this is a new feature I found in PowerPoint. If you want to try to check it out, it's called Zoom. It's a new way to organize the presentation. So you'll kind of see it as we move around. But this is the agenda here. We're going to look at the top threats. Kind of who is Clarity, real brief. Got to get the commercial in there to pay for the whole thing. Just joking, but we do want you to know a little bit about us, very short, and then more into the topic of what CVSS, EPSS, KEVs, and exposure management. A little bit about how those are being used from exploiting hospitals in the healthcare environment, and then summaries and questions. And so with that, let's jump into the healthcare's top threats. And here we'll focus first on the first one. This is all coming from the landscape analysis, which was put out by CMS, updated, I guess, in March 2023. We're actually working on the next revision, and I believe, Anahi, you're going to be participating in that. And this landscape analysis is really a composite of information in all sorts of different areas, from all sorts of different areas within healthcare, to determine what the top attack vectors are. The number one here was social engineering. Phishing is one. You shouldn't click on that, or you're going to get a drive-by and somebody's going to take your credentials. But also this moved into really the support areas now. People calling in and saying, "Hey, this is my new phone, and I need to get it set up for MFA." And there's all sorts of ways to trick people in here. The second one that they found is known vulnerabilities on internet-facing devices. So we know there's a vulnerability out there, and it's on an internet-facing device. That's one area that the bad guys are figuring out and coming in. And the third one is third parties connecting to the hospital. Usually they get into the third party via vector 1 or vector 2, and then you've got a VPN or some sort of remote access that allows them to access the hospital, do credential escalation, and then getting to ransomware. So that's kind of just from a high level. If these are three primary attack vectors. Anahi, would you agree that this is what you're finding when you talk to your colleagues?
They're very traditional, and the threat actors are getting really creative. I just read today that the threat actors are using a vulnerability and Proofpoint to utilize their phishing testing software and functionality to deliver phishing attacks on organizations. So novel approach. But we see all of these, and the one thing that I would add, just as information sharing, is that CISA actually has a free vulnerability scanning service for internet-facing devices and organizations that organizations and listeners to this webinar should definitely check out if you're not already leveraging it. It's free, it's from CISA, it's credible, and can add value instantly to your vulnerability management program. Just side note.
No, great. Also, I'll point out that if you want a copy of this presentation, at the end, I have my email address, and I have a lot of links and resources. That happens to be one of them, so that people that want to get some additional help, not to mention there's some educational material that we'll go through. So a lot of the things, so if people that might be taking notes, if you want to just really kind of focus in, just email me and I'll be happy to send you this slide deck so you'll have all the information. So as we take those three top vectors and we say, okay, so what are we doing about them? Well, the HPH CPGs, which I'm sure you've heard of, which are voluntary, are probably about to become voluntold from what I hear, and any day now. And that would move right into proposed rulemaking. But the idea behind these was really, you've got the essentials and the enhanced. The essentials were to help with these three primary attack vectors. You can see that these particular CPGs were to help with social engineering. These CPGs were to help with the vector 2, and then these with vector 3. Now, the reason I throw this out, because I think it's important with the context of what we're talking about today, which is they are trying, the government, the agency, this is built on hundreds of experts getting together and trying to help crystallize what are the best things that we could be doing as a industry to mitigate the attacks, make it harder for the bad guys to get us. And you'll see that mitigating known vulnerabilities, asset inventory, and mitigating cybersecurity mitigation are really called out there. And if you expand that, you can one of the links it'll take you to this page on the resource page in this presentation, is you can drop down these HPH CPGs and know a little bit more about what they're really talking about. And I'll just point out that mitigating known vulnerabilities, they're saying known vulnerabilities on internet-facing devices. And then over on the asset inventory, they're talking about unmanaged devices to be included. And so that's where you really drive into this CPS issue, which is the cyber physical systems. Because I'm guessing, Anahi, you don't just stop at the IT devices for having to manage the devices on your network, do you?
Absolutely not. And I think in a prior conversation I shared, we have 90,000 IP addresses. Those are connected devices to our network. 70,000 of those are non-traditional Windows devices. And so if we stopped at just our Windows managed devices, we would essentially ignore the majority of the devices that are connected to our network. And so our program includes anything that's connected to our environment.
Yeah, and I think that this is a journey. When I look at the different device types, it's almost a journey by device type, because you've got the IT devices, which we've been taking care of for a while, and so there's a lot of good security solutions around there. But when you move into IoT and medical devices, maybe not so much. And then even building management systems, right? I mean, I think they're in their infancy. There's not very many hospitals out there that are even looking at their building management systems, cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So, right.
Yeah, no, what I was going to say is, yes, the building and management is often an afterthought. But I'll give an example. We had a pretty extensive outage. It was not a cybersecurity outage, but nevertheless an outage. And the trauma elevators that went down to the surgical floors, if you hadn't batched for 3 days in a row, or the last 3 days, the cards, your key cards didn't work. And so people were unable to actually get down to the trauma floors to perform surgeries. And even though there was a back door, people were afraid to use it because everybody's so used to technology. And so building management, IoTs, MIoTs, all of those really need to be considered in the triad of confidentiality, availability, and integrity.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember there was a few years ago, they did a simulation in Phoenix where they started out by a cybersecurity attack on one hospital, and they took out the EMR, the elevators, and the air conditioning units in summer. And they had a whole like 3-day plan, and they went into emergency triage immediately by not being able to transfer patients. When they couldn't transfer patients, they didn't have the records. They couldn't get them in elevators to get them to surgery. They could. It's just created such a madhouse. So, you know, we need to take a look at unmanaged devices. Is what this advice is telling us. And as we think about that advice, probably going to be moving into some sort of audits, some sort of requirements to make sure that you are adhering to these 20 APH CPGs. So what we'll do next is really just take a quick look at who Clarity is and why we're on this call and how we could help. We have the ability to do a comprehensive asset inventory where we can identify all devices on the network, all the different device types, and give you granular data and the communications between the devices. So we then take that data and we go into use for exposure management, which we'll talk about today. We also do network protection so that if one of the mitigations might be, hey, we can't put a patch in immediately, or the device is end of life, we need to do network segmentation on it. We facilitate that. We can create the ACLs, pass them over to ICE automatically. I just did a webinar with a children's hospital where they said, hey, ICE was great, but we weren't really getting anywhere with our segmentation until we got Medigate. And then all of a sudden it was like, wow, we create the ACLs for them automatically, pass them over to ICE, and they can start putting the network security in it with clinical context in mind. Then they've got secure access, where the third vector was, access, whether it's remote or internal, being able to control who comes in and out through incorporations of ZTNA and privileged access management. We've also got threat detection to be able to kind of look around and see what's going on and kind of put it into a MITRE framework so the end users can make sense of it. And then operational efficiency, which is one thing I know, Frank, you had actually asked the question about, is CISOs are challenged financially now. The whole hospitals are challenged financially. And the ability to take this granular data we have and use it for improvement in business operations and asset management. Everybody uses it differently. At Ascension Health, it projects saving $25 million their first year off of cyber data, because they can tell, we don't need this many infusion pumps, because I can see in the data, we can see utilization data. I can see that I can move this CT over. I can see that I don't need a 2-hour response time on this particular device for maintenance. There's so many different ways. I'm just wondering, Anahi, is that a challenge for you? And I know that's the asset management may not fall directly under your purview, but I'm guessing from a governance perspective, you're working with a number of different departments.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, asset management is critical. You can't protect what you don't know about. And so, having the visibility and the ability to know where our devices are and how they're performing is essential to our program. But in addition to that, imagine being able to deliver value to the organization through our security solutions, where we can become a cost savings unit as opposed to just a cost center, and our ability to be able to work with our clinical engineering folks to be able to assess usability of those devices and be able to reposition the devices instead of buying more has been a huge value add and partnership building component of our relationship.
I'm
Yeah,
just
and that's-
curious
that's-
I'm sorry. I'm just curious if you're finding that the use of real-time location services, RTLS, is being baked in to the cybersecurity strategy in relation to that audit of what's being used and what's not being used at any particular moment in time.
Yeah, it's part of our governance model. Because our hospitals are vast and dynamic. Things move, things get lost. Sometimes we can't find things, and RTLS, along with Clarity, has enabled us to gain visibility to where things are and how to manage them effectively.
Thank you.
So as we kind of drill down into exposure management, which is really what we're going to be talking about today. This is from Gartner. So Gartner 1 is coming out with really focusing in on the terminology of CPS, cyber physical systems, and so you'll see more and more on that. But here with respect to exposure management, this is really their model, but we just naturally adhere to it. I think, when you're doing things right and standards come out, if you're doing it right, you're probably pretty close. So we do these things. And so I wanted to kind of outline these very quickly, and then maybe Anahi could provide some, I could do play-by-play and you could do color on this, where we talk about the scoping piece is, really starting off with, we want to look at this not just from all devices, because that would be too broad. We need to maybe say, okay, well, if we want to start addressing vulnerabilities and reducing risk, we need to section this off and define our scope on what we're looking for. Is this a tactic that you use?
It is. For us, really, we have an intake process for all technology that comes through and into our organization. And part of that begins with asking the business, how critical is this function to your organization? And that feeds our risk management processes and our vulnerability management processes in determining what's high risk, what's considered vulnerable, what would the impact to the business be if this thing is compromised or it's non-functional. And so having a good understanding of the criticality of those assets and what they mean to the organization is at the core of all the processes that follow.
And so as you're looking at the devices, and once you can locate them and you know exactly what they are, and you can see that these devices are supporting maybe the ER or the ICU versus that same type of device maybe in a sleep center. Do you classify those as the same type of criticality?
Absolutely not. And that's why the intake process and that business criticality is so important, because you can't treat everything the same, and you certainly can't prioritize everything. And so in order to be able to prioritize our security controls, our investments, where we want to act from a vulnerability management perspective, we really need to understand the weighing of importance for those devices. And that sort of feeds into our risk-based approach to protection, which includes vulnerability management.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second there is discovery. I think I alluded to it when I was talking about the webinar I just did, which is on our website if anybody wants to go see that. Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. They talk about discovery, the ability to find all the devices, not just the IT devices, and ID them for what they are: the make, model, the manufacturer, the operating system, and instead of just what the network interface card is. That additional level of granularity is really how we one of the things we excel at. And so if you're looking to get into something like this or discover more, or you're having issues with your existing system, please, we'd happy to come in and do a proof of value and just show you that we see more, and there's a lot to that. But the discovery is a super important component. And then you take that data and prioritization. What are there? I know are there aspects or ways that you look, like maybe looking at legacy devices different, or how do you see prioritization, and what are the things that you think about?
Can I just add one question that we
Sure,
might
sure,
weave
sure.
into this?
Right.
I just had a question from the audience. Where does 5G fit into this in terms of new technologies versus legacy technologies from the security perspective? So don't have to answer it now, but as we go along, if it fits in, one of our audience members is curious.
I'm happy to touch on it now, right? 5G, like, we have to say it, Gen AI and any other, emergent technologies are going to create a lot of value for our organizations and our ability to continue to drive our vision and our strategy. But they come with unique sets of risks. And so in the whole concept of prioritization, we have to take a look at what those risks are, what the threat vectors are, and how they might make us even more vulnerable or potentially less vulnerable if we're utilizing that same technology in our security products. So certainly, anytime we have some type of emergent technology, it needs to be taken into consideration. NIST has some great resources for sort of navigating emergent technology and how to implement controls around the protection of that technology. But it still all comes down to prioritization, right? How critical are those devices to the business? If they're unavailable, what is the business impact to the organization? And then, are they running on unsupported operating systems? Are they connected to the internet? Are those exposures exploitable? And this is something that we do on a daily basis. For those of you who are members of a Health ISAC, you're probably really familiar with the volume of vulnerabilities that are communicated, exploited vulnerabilities that are communicated on any given day. And so looking at what the impact of those exploitable vulnerabilities could be on our organization is an exercise that we go through almost every day. I mentioned the Proofpoint exploit. That's a third party, potential third party risk, but it could make us vulnerable. So we engaged in a conversation this morning around what's the impact to those? How do we assess how that might make us vulnerable? Yesterday it was VMware. Like I said, it's a daily exercise to really look through all of these. We can't mitigate all of them, and we can't act on them with the same level of urgency. So it's really looking at the different threat vectors and risk components to making decisions about what are we going to tackle first? Who are we going to mobilize? And I think that's another really important component. We generate work for other people. If we're screaming fire every given day, the other IT partners, whether it's clinical engineering or applications teams or infrastructure teams, they're going to stop listening, and they're not going to be willing to partner with us as quickly if every day it's a fire drill. So that prioritization also helps to demonstrate that we're being responsible about how we are deploying resources across the organization.
Excellent, excellent. Just as a reminder to the audience, we're taking questions on the Q&A as opposed to the chat. So look forward to hearing from you. Okay, Ty, I'm sorry.
No, this is all good. I think this is wonderful. We're and then as you think about that, you've got the validation piece, which is just make sure that you know these exposures or these vulnerabilities are that we've got them, and then you know, what are we going to do about it? Mobilization, like you were saying, you've got to provide you know, how can we harden these devices? Should we put in network segmentation? And then ideally pass it directly off to maybe a CMMS ticketing system that can drive the workflow, because when, like you said, 50,000 devices, you got all thousands and thousands of devices. You have to do this efficiently and effectively. It has to be a systematized, and so these are the things that we can help with. And so as we get into kind of what is intelligent vulnerability management, I think we've touched on these, but we'll kind of go high level because I think a lot of the people on the call understand this. So we just want to maybe make the point to make a larger point that you know, zero-day vulnerabilities aren't usually where you're getting hit from, and only 2 to 7% of all the vulnerabilities. The thousands of vulnerabilities that you see out there, even on that are known vulnerabilities on HISAC, 2 to 7%, very, very small percentage. And then it doesn't really account for what we were saying, the business operations side. What's the impact to the business? And so that's clearly a factor that needs to be taken into consideration when you're going through this. So Anahi, I would imagine that, you know, you're saying every day it's a different vulnerability, but I hear so many times that the CEO calling down because they heard something in the Wall Street Journal about you know, an attack that's happening, and it's like, are we protected? And do you experience that?
As I mentioned, our organization is acutely aware of the importance of cybersecurity, and so there's, you know, we actually have our own cybersecurity committee of the board. That's how much they prioritize it. So I get a lot of questions around this, but I'm proud to say that our organization really does trust that we are thinking about business outcomes as we're building our cybersecurity program. You know, I tell my team often, we are 2 hands away from the patient. We may not be direct caregivers, but everything that we do can impact clinical care and business operations. And so we have to be really intentional about prioritizing and thinking through how things might impact the business. You know, one of the things I have a lot of conversations with the business around risk management whenever we want to onboard something. And a lot of times the business will say, but there's no data stored on there. And I have to explain to them that just because there is no data on there, a supply chain attack could result, or a vulnerability being exploited could result in loss of availability to our network, to a department, to that particular device if it is deemed critical. And so I'm having to do that less and less as people really start to understand that cybersecurity is not just confidentiality, that it also includes the availability of systems, given, you know, what's in the news. But it really is about prioritization and making sure that business outcomes are considered as we are endeavoring in new relationships and acquiring new technology.
Are you saying that those are being built into the service level agreements that you have with cybersecurity firms, that the direct result on business outcomes or cybersecurity outcomes?
Cybersecurity outcomes. So SLAs for business outcomes are always included in our agreements,
Mhm.
because it could be a cybersecurity issue, it could be a technology issue, or something else. And so we certainly make sure that those are added, but then I have a standard set of security terms that holds them accountable for, patching levels, vulnerability management, vulnerability disclosures.
Mhm.
And so it's about a 9-page security addendum that covers pretty much all areas of cybersecurity. And then, it gets edited down depending on the type of service that
Right.
the third party or technology may be providing, but it's essential to protect us.
So it's no longer the utility model where the lights are on, the lights are off, and if they're on, then you get paid.
No, not
Okay.
at all. And there's extensive language on indemnification.
Right.
Should something bad happens, who pays? Who's accountable? How are we being indemnified, not just for first party, but third party issues? We
Yeah.
require insurance levels. I mean, it's becoming a really comprehensive need in order to manage all of the different threat vectors that could affect us because of our supply chain partners.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just throw out there for listeners who are interested in that aspect, healthsectorcouncil.org had a work group that got together. It was attorneys from both hospitals and medical device manufacturers, and they worked out like 50 clauses for the document. I think is called Medical Device Cybersecurity Model Contract Language. So if it's you can search for it or email me. Happy to put you in place with it. But including cybersecurity in your contracts is smart. So
Yeah, I actually have a draft version of a new version of that contract language. So we continue to improve it as the threat landscape changes.
see, Frank, I told you she's everywhere. She's I don't know how she does everything.
Ubiquitous, we call
it. So just kind of running through to put some ideas out there. For instance, a CVSS that had a 7.8, so that's a common vulnerability scoring system for a particular attack that Black Basta, who was responsible for attacking Ascension, whether this was the one they used or they used a series of them. I want to point out that this rating of 7.8 on the CVSS scoring system would allow, root privilege access and game's over. So there are, it's not just about how high the CVSS is, and and then if you think about them in comparison with KEV's known exploitable vulnerabilities, and you start comparing them, you've got so many more than the KEVs. Anahi, how do you, when you're thinking about CVSSs and KEVs, do you have any thoughts to share?
So we prioritize the vulnerabilities that are exploitable, and we consume thousands of vulnerabilities. We're no different than any other organization. We track thousands of vulnerabilities. We scan our systems continuously to identify new vulnerabilities, but you can't get to them all. It's physically impossible. There's not enough time in the world. And so we prioritize those that we know have common exploits. And then in addition to whether there are known exploits, we look at, again, it goes back to what's the business criticality of this and where is it resident? Is it in a segmented component of our network? Is it internet facing? Is it running on unsupported operating systems. All these different factors play into how we prioritize. We've done a lot of automation because everything that I just described, if you're doing it manually, is also incredibly laborious. But that's sort of the thought process around how we prioritize which vulnerabilities we're going to go after and what we classify as critical to our organization.
And I'll point out, so that with that, the example I had for the 7.8 CVSS on Windows, if you look on this particular scale, it's not in the, critical. It's barely high. And so I've had CISOs tell me that, well, yeah, because if I was an attacker and I had to create an attack, I'm probably thinking that the hospitals are going to go ahead and try to fix their 10s and 9s, and those are the ones they're going to be working on, where I can get just as deep penetration on something that's lower down on the CVSS score that they don't have the volume to get to because there's so many of them. So it's so this mindset, it's not a panacea. And as we kind of move into, the known exploitable vulnerabilities, I'll just say some data. We have 20 million devices under security, maybe 3,000 hospitals. And so we aggregate all the data and look at it every now and then and put out some reports. This is a report that we put out on KEVS. So the devices out there that 63% of devices found in healthcare have KEVS. 93% of KEVS could be remediated with a patch or an update. But my guess is, for you, like everyone, patches and updates aren't as easy as they sound for medical devices. It's not the same. You don't have a patch Tuesday for medical devices, I would imagine.
No, and a lot of times the vendors may not allow us to apply the patch. I actually just was doing a contract where I have a sort of a patch clause, and the vendor redlined it to just when when the patch is available from them. And I redlined it again. I'm like, unless they're available from Microsoft or other third parties that are not associated with your with the vendor, because it gets really challenging if we're at the mercy of vendors, medical device specifically, and IoT vendors authorizing us to apply patches.
Yeah,
I would imagine after the last 2 weeks, there might be a patchanoia, considering the events that happened.
Yeah, with CrowdStrike, I'm sure that I'm guessing that's where you were going with that one.
Right on, right.
So I think that, in this lull where it's like, hey, I'm waiting for a patch, or I can't patch it, network segmentation is often what we find clients go to. And so with that, it's not as easy as it sounds. You need to know what the device is. You need to know what it's talking to within a clinical context of the modality of a CT machine. It's not just the CT. It's not just one box. It's several pieces, and which ones you need. So they need to be able to communicate with each other. So it becomes it's complicated. So it's the network segmentation is important to have. And I'll just, not that we have to talk about this one a lot, but the EPSS, another scoring system, but you can see unsupported OSs with high EPSS scores. I mean, all of the different devices, there's just so many of them. And where do you, as you were saying, where do you take, your limited resources that we all have, limited resources, and apply them? It becomes quite a trick. And as we talk about what's going on out there in the marketplace, these are instances of internet-facing device issues. These all have some context of being internet-facing. And so when again, going back to the vector number 2 is internet-facing devices with known exploitable vulnerabilities. And some data that we compiled here if you have if you looked at CVSS scores of 9.0 and higher, now I'll point out that we've got some industrial information in here because Clarity, who bought Medigate, Medigate has been built from the ground up for healthcare, knowing devices, totally focused on healthcare. As we've come together with them, Clarity was doing much of the same thing for industrial, which is great for healthcare because now we have all the building management systems mapped out already. We're the Rockwells and the Siemens of the world. We've got all of that already mapped out for cybersecurity. So when we look at things in OT as well as medical devices. But you'll see here that it's such a large number, a large percentage of devices in healthcare. If you just went with CVS 9.0 or higher, and then if you say, okay, well, let's narrow that down some for internet-facing devices with known exploitable vulnerabilities. It comes down some. You get down to 1.9% or kind of a combined over OT and IT of 1.6%. But then this blind spot is for devices that aren't 9.0 or higher that are communicating directly online and contain at least one KEV. And so what that looks like is this slide where you've got the CVSS, if you went for all of your vulnerabilities in the gray, which is just way too much, out of the total population scope. And then if you said, okay, well, if we just went for the known exploitable vulnerabilities with KEVs, that would be red. But you can see how if you just went for the CVSS, you'd miss 38% of the devices that are connected to the internet that are actually being exploited. And so there's just if you don't have the data and the right perspective, you can waste a lot of time trying to protect things that aren't really going to get attacked. And so as we move into these internet-facing devices, well, let me back up. I kind of went through that. Anahi, do you have thoughts or comments? Anything you want to add in here?
I just kept thinking hamsters on a wheel. That's essentially what we are in the game of vulnerability management, and it's a never-ending effort. And so if we try to boil the ocean and patch everything, we'll never get it done, which I think I mentioned earlier. And so it's critical to be able to understand where your risks are and really focus on those areas so that your risk management is commensurate with your vulnerability management, so that it's not just a futile effort.
And then the devices is just kind of another way to look at the data. Is you have these, this is from our 20 million devices. The number of internet devices out there, you look at that and say, wow, there's 39% of imaging devices are on the internet. And that's amazing. And 14% are running on outdated operating systems. And if you look down towards the bottom there, the 32% of the imaging systems are running on outdated operating systems because as you said, they're not necessarily upgrading them fast enough. And that's all part of the new FDA Patch Act, but it doesn't take care of the legacy devices. But the thing that I wanted to point out in all this is differentiating between a PC workstation and an imaging workstation without a tool like Medigate by Clarity. It's almost impossible. So you don't know whether the device has got an outdated operating system. You can see that maybe, but you don't know what it's doing. Is it part of a radiology system? And so it becomes very difficult to determine what you're going to put your limited resources behind.
Yeah, and I do want to recognize that, the healthcare industry is really challenged. We are seeing for the 12th year in a row, we're the #1 most targeted industry. That doesn't seem to be changing. A lot of that has to do with the lack of resources that healthcare organizations have to invest in cybersecurity, which is why that prioritization is so critical to being able to have at least a fighting chance in this fight. And so, for those small to mid-sized organizations that don't have a plethora of resources, using some form of automation to gain visibility, and really using things like CISA's free scanning to at least identify what's internet facing so that you can just go after those, if nothing else, I think are just tools that can at least help to augment challenge cybersecurity programs at healthcare organizations.
Yeah, well said. We are definitely. I'm part of a work group now called Underserved Providers Cybersecurity Advisory Group, where we are. I mean, so it's known the smaller hospitals, the smaller organizations, they struggle too, and it's difficult to have all these tools, and so I mean, you've got your finger on the pulse there. It's a challenge. It's a problem. And the bad guys aren't going away because the money is so good. So we have to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just a screenshot just to kind of show you, we are able to create these perspectives on what type of vulnerabilities you're looking at, or combination of vulnerabilities, and then provide them straight out for you, synthesize all that straight up so you can decide which ones are in priority group 1 or 2 or 3, and which ones are being actively exploited or not. And so it's an easy way to filter, because I think you had talked about enough time in the day, Anahi. I know Greg Garneau, who I bet you know Greg Garneau. He said that there's not enough time in the day or bourbon in the bottle to go after all of the vulnerabilities that are out there on the devices. And so just kind of in summary, we talked about the ability to define, okay, we're going to look at this hospital or this ICU or this area, these device types, and then we're going to discover all the information on them in the communications and prioritize which ones are most critical based on the location, the operations, the impact, criticality, risk to patients. Make sure that we actually have, do we have those vulnerabilities in our environment? And then what are we going to do about it and make it actionable at scale? So those are that's the idea of exposure management. And so I like to just take a moment and Anahi or Frank, you have thoughts that maybe something I didn't ask, or you wanted to bring up, or a topic or something that you'd like to share.
Well, I would just say that a lot of what was shared might feel overwhelming to cybersecurity programs that are resource constrained. I certainly, the message for me to the audience is recognizing that there are challenges in being able to get everything done all at once. Really think about prioritization. Think about utilizing business criticality as one of the components, and then think about what is internet facing as areas to start, and then from there sort of walk back to things that are exploitable, things that have higher scores. And really, if you need to start somewhere, start small with one component, and then as you get comfortable, build on that by adding some of the other components as you sort of take a layered approach to your vulnerability management program. Doesn't have to be everything all at once.
Great. We do have a few questions from the audience I'd like to give priority to. So one actually sort of maps with what Anahi had mentioned. One listener is curious about thoughts on boards and executives supporting more executive level IT roles that report to the CEO and not other departments like the CFO. Uh, and that ties in with a question I had for you on Nahi too. You talked about needing resources. That could be read a number of different ways. If you had to pick the number one resource, well, let's just cross money off the list. What would the other resources be? And are you finding that there's more involvement in getting IT execs reporting directly to the most senior management?
So in terms of, I've been working, I've been a system in healthcare for 20 years. I know I don't look that old. Um, kidding. And in both organizations, I reported to the CIO, and never did I struggle with getting the executive support that I needed. And it was about, so for me, it's less about the reporting relationship and more about the type of organization that you're working for.
Mm,
I certainly see a lot more CISOs now regularly reporting to the board than I did 10 years ago.
really?
I don't see many that have a dedicated cybersecurity committee of the board, but I have a dotted line to that board, and I have accountability to them to make sure that I'm bringing issues, that I'm raising issues. They constantly ask me if I have the right level of resources, the right number of resources, am I getting the support that I need? That committee of the board does have two CISOs, from one from banking, another one from the tech industry, tech security. And so there's knowledge there about what is needed because they're managing, their security programs and understand what the challenges are. In terms of resources, honestly, it takes a village. I don't know that I have one type of resource that I would prioritize. I will share, since we're talking about vulnerability management, that a few years ago, we were having a real challenge with attacking vulnerabilities. Everybody was too busy. So I actually went to our executive management team and asked for a number of resources. One of them was an information security resource. The rest of them were resources for the applications team and infrastructure teams to be able to affect the work that we were creating from a vulnerability management perspective. So it's not just the information security team that's doing all the work. There's plenty of work to go around. And so we need to recognize that those resources are as critical, if not more critical, in advancing a vulnerability management program.
Great answer. Great answer. And Ty, we have a sort of a product set question. When is Medigate to XDome change happening?
Well, it's we love the name Medigate. It's such a strong name in the industry, and we don't want to confuse anybody. So it's in process, and we're doing it gradually so that we don't confuse anybody. So XDome is here, and it's we're rolling it out and installing it. It's really just a naming convention at this point, but we've been with Claroty for 2 years. I think we have more people working for the Medigate side now than we did when Claroty bought them. So it's not, we are still very vertical, and that won't be changing anytime soon.
Okay, thanks. One's a technical question. How does an organization secure a medical device? What is the easiest way to remove it from the internet? How hard is that to do?
So that's kind of a loaded question. There are a variety of ways to to secure medical devices. Removing it from the internet is certainly effective if it doesn't need internet connectivity. But the challenge nowadays is that most of these devices are talking to the cloud, and so they need some sort of internet connectivity. And so what I would in that space, if you want to remove it from the internet altogether, that can be done through a variety of tools, including firewalls. One of the things that we have done in the past is remove the browser from so that not just the visibility from the internet, but being able to surf the internet from some of these devices, because a lot of them are computers, which could lead to, SIM call attacks or malware coming through, internet access. And so those are two ways, I think, to lower the risks of internet access, but network segmentation is another way. Compensating controls in terms of if you can put host-based firewalls on those devices and really ratchet down what they're talking to, leverage that, as well as any other. If you can put EDR on them, which sometimes it's authorized, sometimes it's not. So it really depends on what you can and can't do with those devices. I gave examples. I'm probably forgetting examples, but it really is specific to the type of device.
Thank you. We're reaching the end of our time here. I'd like to open it up. I mean, Ty, if you have any closing remarks. First, before you do, I just like to thank Clarity and Christiana for their insights today. Very, very valuable. And I've been on a lot of cybersecurity calls, and the technical and actual cultural parts of this presentation, I think were excellent. So we'd like to thank you, and we'd like to thank the attendees. Ty, closing remarks from Clarity?
Just delighted to be a partner with Chime and Christiana Care. We value those partnerships very much. I appreciate Anahi. I really appreciate your time and sharing, not only here, but oh my goodness, all of the different conferences and webinars and work groups and leadership that you provide in this industry. It doesn't go unnoticed.
Thank you for the kind words. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. I think this is a really important topic, and one that a lot of organizations struggle with because it really is hard. It takes intentional effort, and we just will never get to zero. So that prioritization is really important, and business enablement. I think the more that we are seen as partners with our business and not as disruptive, we gain trust, we gain support, and we can actually improve our cybersecurity programs because our business will understand why we're so critical to the survival of our organizations.
Thank you so much. Again, this presentation, for those of you who are watching and want to see it again on demand, will be up within the next week, along with the presentation slides. So we thank you for your time and look forward to seeing you in another Chime Digital Health Insights event. Good day.